Hello and welcome back. This is a follow-up video to a tower moment leads to a decision that has yet to be made. So, I kind of left that video on a cliffhanger, and I really didn't want to do that, but I'm sort of limited to the time I have at the moment. So, with that said, this is the follow-up video. But before I get started, I want to use the example to sort of illustrate where this is going to end up going, which is really good. So don't mistake this for a bad ending. I think it's actually a really good ending. So in the last example, we had an IT worker that felt underappreciated in their job, and this led to a Six of Swords moment where they sort of felt betrayed and felt like they had to move away, not realizing that this situation was completely different than what they had encountered in the past, where this person had basically been used and abused in the workplace in a way that just left them feeling really sour. So when they actually got into a good workplace where a lot of people were actually carrying their weight with their particular jobs and tasks, it left them feeling like, well, nobody's really answering me or something like that. And so it's kind of like, and I'm bringing that up now in terms of an example because that can sort of lead the person like, okay, well, maybe I'm sitting here doing all the work and nobody else is, not realizing that everyone else is actually super busy doing their work. And in fact, the work environment is the complete opposite of what they came from, but at the same time, they don't realize it because they've actually never been in that environment before. It's almost completely alien to them. So that being said, I did draw some cards. I drew 5 cards, and I think they really... actually, it's more than 5 cards. It's actually 11 cards. Some of them are supplement, but I'll get to that in just a second. So now that we have that example out of the way, we're going to look at this as sort of that worker going, okay, what do I need to do in this situation, and how would that workplace or team or whoever they left, how would they also need to look at the situation? It's really interesting, and I'll try to keep this as short as possible because I think the conclusion in and of itself is a really good one. And I think that if we take the example that some of the cards give us in this particular spread and adopt them into our own lives, I think we can really begin to see, okay, this is where this kind of stuff really, really helps people. So, first off, the first card we have is the Justice card. And the Justice card, I think, represents an evolution of the King of Swords, as he's holding a sword here, but he's made a decisive decision in terms of where this goes next. Now, what's interesting is I supplemented this with a couple of other cards from the other tarot deck that I have, the Meaning Tarot deck. And what I got was very interesting. I got the Chariot, but behind it we had the Five of Cups in reverse. And what I take this as is that this justice is going to help, in the example that we used, this worker, quickly move away from this way of thinking that they've seemingly identified within this situation and say, oh, okay, things don't have to be this way. Well, okay, let's actually get some work done here. So in that, I'm going to read the definition that's here because I think it really drives home the point as to what we're, as a collective, moving towards as this worker in the example. Is acceptance, hope, forgiveness, gratitude, charity, kindness, new alliance, and most of all, recovery. Because I feel like this worker is trying to recover from something that they just completely misunderstood. And like I illustrated earlier, I mean, if they had been in a workplace where they had been undervalued so many times, why would they think it would be different? So in that sense, they're definitely going to get on that chariot and move away from that pretty quickly. And that can lead to something that I think all parties need to have, which is this King of Cups energy. That's a really well-rounded, emotionally mature view of things. And in a situation where a misunderstanding is at the heart of the problem, that type of energy is going to really help resolve the situation. And of course, the King of Cups is the embodiment of that emotional maturity in terms of being that of the major suits within the tarot. So I think that's a great illustration. Now, what's really interesting is what sort of, I think, underlines the situation is the Temperance card. Listening to everyone's better angels involved. It's not something that is easy, but it's also necessary in situations where there is a misunderstanding. If that happened more often, we would have the kind of outcome that we're going to get with at the end of this reading. Now, for the worker in particular, the person in question, they might feel like they're in a bit of a Page of Swords energy. They're not as decisive as the King or Queen of Swords, but they're getting there. Again, going back to the worker, we have the example of someone who may have never sent an email saying, hey, look, I made this mistake. I actually like working here. I mistook this whole situation. I'm sorry that happened. Here's what happened in previous workplaces, that sort of thing. And taking that action can really feel like you're in that Page of Swords energy where you're not necessarily, and I don't take this as a spying card or anything like that, as most people do, or collecting information, but I see it in this particular instance as someone sort of stepping forward into that decisive decision making that the King of Swords sort of represents in an aspect. And I think in this sense, it's almost like that worker is stepping forward, sending that kind of email for the first time, and really saying, you know what, I'm gonna make this decision, and this is it, for better or worse. And the next time they might have to do something like that, they might be in a more Queen of Swords energy, and then the follow-up time they might even be more decisive in their energy in that King of Swords, because they're gaining that experience along the way. Now below that, we have the Devil card. And what I see this as breaking the chains of this bad habit, this type of old ways of thinking that led to that sort of Six of Swords and thus Tower moment in the last reading. To follow that up, we have what looks to be the start of recovery. And that is the Ace of Wands. That is a new fiery energy that's going to be entering in the situation. And that fiery energy is going to probably ignite something. And the following card's definitely going to show that. But it's going to ignite something that I think ultimately will become really foundational for the recovery of the situation overall. And most of all, it'll show that. And I'm just getting a new idea, a new way of illuminating things will come from that fiery energy, almost thinking of this as a torch lighting the way. So below the Ace of Wands, we have the Queen of Pentacles. Now, the way I see this, and it's not really focusing as well as I'd like, but oh well, you get the point. It says, focus on your home, family, success, and abundance. That's a little saying under it. And I would say, in that sense, once you have that fiery energy going and you start to see that recovery happen, that's probably the best thing you can do, is to basically, keep working. Unfortunately, I don't think any of the other definitions really fit, but I would say, truthful, kind, and intelligent are all going to be playing a role in that kind of recovery. Now, the final card that I have here, I think, really points to how the situation's going to end up, and that is the Sun card. Now, I think with that Ace of Wands sort of bringing light to the situation, it's really going to spark something that's going to perhaps lead to an idea that might be in its infancy, but ultimately become the center of whatever this situation ultimately is. Say the worker finally gets back in the job. They say, hey, I've been working on this idea that would really help us in this way, but I was kind of scared to come forward with it, so I just wanted to bring that to the table now. And it ends up not only being received really well, but becomes something that's so integral in their system, because in the last reading we talked about reevaluating systems and mechanisms within perhaps a workplace, and maybe this idea that this person has becomes such an integral part of how the workplace functions that, and it's like a proprietary program is what I'm kind of getting at, like a meeting type program where people can go in and have meetings, exchange ideas, and do all this in off hours so people can have all that information accessible. But it's just particularly tailored to that workplace, if you will. And this person's just really good at that kind of thing, and they almost just walked away from the job, not even showing this idea that ends up maybe becoming $1 million idea for the company. That being said, I think that is where the sun comes in, because that's where the radiance and brilliance of allowing someone to basically grow into who they are and shed these I want to say emotional blockages, but almost old ways of doing things and seeing things that are going to lead to that. And oftentimes people don't get to do that in the workplace, and that's really sad, because that's where all that innovation comes from. But here's the kicker, and this is why I really wanted to do this follow-up reading, is because below the sun we have the world, completion. The cycle has completed. So not only are you closing out a cycle as a collective, or we are closing out the cycle as a collective, but it looks like whatever this worker in this example is leaving behind is actually going to be the past. It's done. No more. It's finished. And the saying on this is really cool. It says, everything you have worked for is coming together. Accomplishment, success, completion, synthesis, perfection, recognition, mastery. So if this is a personal mastery of ridding yourself of these old patterns, as in the worker that we used, or perhaps old patterns if you're in a relationship, or old patterns of doing things if it's a group setting, that ultimately it will lead to, the sun and the world. I mean, you can't have one without the other, right? And that's the coolest thing, is that, what seems like a tower moment can ultimately lead to real personal growth if you're willing to take the time and sit in that King of Cups energy. Maybe risk it as a Page of Swords for that Ace of Wands, that idea, that thing that comes forth and illuminates, because this is on fire. That's how I see it. And then ultimately you become brighter than the sun, baby. You can't get better than that. And what does the sun attract? It attracts the world. And that's it. That's great. What a great conclusion to something that could have turned bad. Because tower moments can always be life altering, depending on how you deal with it. So keep yourself in that King of Cups energy. And yeah, I think this is really cool. I'm very excited to see what happens next for us as a collective. I think this is awesome. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you found this reading helpful. And again, I'm sorry to leave on a cliffhanger. In the future, when I'm able to do longer readings, I'll make sure to come to a conclusion before I finish the video. But until that day comes, I may have a few cliffhanger readings. So Mercury retrograde, right? Well, thank you so much for watching, and I appreciate it.